In this part of the tutorial, we're going to be working on unwrapping these objects or creating the UV mapping, which will basically assign where the textures are going to go. But we're not going to do this on the base shape, we're going to do this on the low res we exported. We don't really need this base shape, so you could easily just select it and press delete if you wanted to. We don't need the background anymore, we don't need the reference image, so you can delete that also. I'll make a new layer, just put them on the new layer anyway. So layers right here, manage layers. With this option, it's basically like Photoshop. You have multiple layers and things in different layers. So if you select everything and create a new layer, what's going to happen is it'll assign all your objects onto that new layer. If you don't select it and you create a new layer, you'd have to manually add them onto the layer. So it's just quicker to select them first, create new layer, and if I press the hide button, everything goes away. It's hidden. It's on its own layer. It's turned off. So I'm going to rename this and call this base shape since I don't need these anymore. So I'm going to hide that now. If I make a new layer, let's call this the low res. I can import the low resolution pieces in there and create one more layer. Call this high res. Okay? And if you notice this check mark corresponds with the current active layer. So let's say, for example, I want to create a I changed this check mark to the low res, so I'm active on the low resolution layer and it's turned off. So if I create a box and I start drawing, you notice there is no box. It doesn't exist, because actually if you turn the hidden off, it's there. It was created active on a turned off layer. So just be cautious which check mark you're active on and which ones are turned off, in case that becomes a little confusing. So I don't really need this, so I'm going to click this and delete this one. Alright, so that's been cleared. I'm going to turn off high res for now. I don't need that one. So I'm active on, it doesn't matter which one you select, it just matters what check mark is. So check mark on the low res layer, so that's my active. Now I'm going to go and import my sign. Let's go import from where I last saved it on the midterm project. We'll go post low res and press open. Default settings should be fine. We're not worried about materials or anything else, so just press import. Boom. And now we have the pillar. It's imported in the exact same position that it was exported out at, which is the base shapes. So if I unhide this, you can see that it perfectly aligns right back up where it originally came out at. So I don't need the base shape, so I'm just going to turn that back off again, but you can see that it puts it exactly where it was before. So if you don't make your layers first, you're going to import everything on top of itself, and it's going to get rather confusing trying to pick between the pieces. So it's kind of easier if you make new layers before you start doing the importing process. So again, I'm active with the check mark on low res, so I'm going to keep pulling in the rest of the low res pieces. So let's go import. We need rock low res, press open, and import. And import, we'll do sign low res, open, import. Import stone front low res, and import the very last one, which is the stone right low res. Open, import. And so again, all these have been check marked onto the low res layer, so it imports directly onto the active layer. So now I can turn these off and on, and you can see the low res is sitting exactly on top of the on top of the base shapes. So we sent out the base shape into ZBrush, sculpted onto it, and we're going to now use this low res that we created. That's a little more accurate to the shapes that we want. Alright, now let's click on the active high res layer, put a check mark on there, so whichever one you check mark will make it active. And we'll unhide that and hide low res. We don't need to see that anymore. Now let's import all of our objects onto the high res layer. So the post high res, press import, import. Boom, and the post appears here. You can see how dense the polygons are, very, very dense. If you press F4, you can see that it looks more or less like the ZBrush shape, very nice and detailed. So let's keep importing. We'll go import the rock high res, import. Next up we'll import the sign high res. Had we exported and imported all as one piece, that would save us a lot of time. However, you lose that control of being able to do ZBrush work on each piece selectively. And we can also adjust our UVs and stuff separately in different pieces, so it makes it easier in some respects, even though it takes a little more time to import all these pieces individually. And stone right, high res, import. And for some reason it's looking for a bitmap. It may be because it was exported with originally as a material on there. Maybe from the initial check marks we did when we first exported on Max, but either way we're going to skip that. We don't need that. And now it's saying basically it can't find it, it doesn't know what to do. We're just going to press OK. We don't need that. Alright, and so now we have, slide that over there, all of our high-res pieces imported directly onto the high-res layer with a check mark. So if I turn that off with a light switch, you can see we have base shapes, we have high-res shapes, and we have low-res shapes, all sitting exactly where it left the program. And that's exactly what we want. Don't move them off each other. We want to make sure they're exactly sitting exactly where they left. Also of note, notice how the original block sat exactly on there, but if I turn the base shapes off, you can see it now they're both kind of floating in the above it. So at this point we can adjust these. So I'm going to select both of these. Since both layers are on, I'm actually going to be grabbing both of these. So it doesn't matter which one I'm check marked, it's just going to grab both. So now I'm going to adjust this. I don't want to slide one or the other. If I grab just the low res, and I move just the low res, it's going to misalign these, and I don't want these misaligned. I want them to be exactly on top of each other. So I'm going to select both at once, and then use the down arrow and pull it down. So now it's sitting on there. So now it's exactly, both pieces still aligned, and resituated here. So if you wanted to, you can also, it's a little more complicated, not necessary at the moment, but if you needed to, you can move some polygons around to try and re-encompass them, and try and rematch them to make them look a little more accurate. But right here you can see they're pretty much exactly on top of each other, so we don't need to play with any polygons. Maybe right here you can see where it's kind of, the lowers is popping out maybe a little too far, but no, you don't really need to mess with anything. Alright, so there's our pieces. I'm going to turn off high res, I don't need that anymore. All I'm going to work with, activate this layer with check mark, is just the low res layer. So now I have the low res, everything's ready, and we just have to create the unwrapping effect on here. So let's go with, material editor. What we need to do is put a checkered pattern here so we can tell what distortions we're getting on here. So if I click on this blank shape right here, there's nothing on here. Or I can pick a different one, let's say this one for example. Let's go to diffuse, we can click here. Or I can go down to here and go to diffuse color. So I'm going to, it doesn't matter which you pick. We'll go to this one, and instead of doing file, which we're adding a picture, we're going to use a preset, just a checkered pattern. So I'm going to press OK on that. And so the checkered pattern loads up. Now let's say I go, go up to the parent menu, and it's already turned on for me, which is great, and it's already set to the high-res mode, so that's great. I can drag this on here. Let's say, let's go with the rock. But nothing's actually going to happen. You can see it's very, very distorted. It's not looking like a checkered pattern. And the reason this is happening is because there's no UVs on the object. It doesn't know where to put the textures. It's just a scrambled mess at the moment. So if I go over to, let's say we close that window now, go to Modify, and then click on this. Let's go down to Unwrap. Unwrap UVW, and now there's an unwrap on there. Now it knows how to start creating your UVs. So now we have this checker pattern, black and white checkers. However, it's very, very large. In order to tell the distortions, we need to shrink this down because it doesn't look too bad right now. What we're looking for is how accurate these squares are. The square right here, you can see the shadow from the sign. The square looks pretty good, but now it's really sagging down here. So let's click on this material. As I expand out the menu, change tiling to, let's say, 20. So as I change that to 20, you can see it's going more vertical. And if I change this to 20, and then go back to the parent menu, you'll see it resets that. So now you can see they're all squares, but then you can start to see all the distortions. So let's say I press the F4 button, and it turns off our line. So now we can see that this is really distorted. And this is really nice. So if we put a stone texture on here, it's going to look really clear like the photograph. And here you're going to really stretch out your details, and it's going to look really bad on the photograph. So this needs to be unwrapped correctly so everything looks nice and uniform checkered. And that's why I put the checker pattern on here, so we can tell how the unwrap is looking if we're getting it to look correctly. So the textures will apply on there, but we don't know where to paint them yet because there's no UV coordinates, and it's very distorted. So we have this ready here. Let's go to Open UV Editor, and we can keep throwing this on here to all the object, but I'll do it after I put the UVs on them. So Open UV Editor, and we'll start with this one stone right here. So if I zoom out, you can see that it's pretty much just a stone. If I click on, let's say, polygon mode, I can start grabbing some of the polygons. You can see they're corresponding up to here. But unlike any of the previous simpler objects where you could grab one polygon at a time, if you press F4 again, you'll see your lines turn off and on. But this would take a long time to grab, using Control to add every one of these and pick all of your polygons and use the quick planer like we're used to, which will create a plane. But this isn't a plane, this is a spherical object. So this isn't quite going to work like that. So what we need to do is go over to one of the new tools in the peel section. We're going to peel off our polygons. But before we do that, we need to select what we're going to peel. And so there's something called the seam right here. And this only lights up if you're active on one of these. So if you're not, let's say it works on vertex mode, you get more options when you're on the edge mode, and you get different options when you're on the polygon mode. But if you're not on any, none of them will light up down here. So you have to make sure you're on one of these modes in order to get the options down here. So I'm going to pick polygons because that's a little easier, I guess. And then now you have a couple options down here. So you can go to Edit Seams, which we'll start with this one and see what it does. Edit Seams means you can selectively pick where you want to cut off your UVs. So instead of clicking all the shapes, I can selectively say, I want to cut from, let's say, let's go here. So I click one and it turns blue. Let's turn off this. You can see the grid right here. I don't need the grid on, so I'm going to turn that off with the G button. Now it makes it a little easier to see. So I click there, and if you don't have to hold any buttons. You need to use Control. You can just grab whatever you want and just keep clicking around. And the idea is we're going to slice this texture part off. However, by default, when you start slicing things, you're going to get something called a seam. When you have two edges put together, you might notice that the textures don't line up correctly. If there's discolorations, different bumps or circles, texture, roughness. So you want to make sure you hide your seam. So I don't want to cut it straight across the surface because you're going to see a line coming down through your surface. I'm going to try and hide it where no one's going to see it. So if I'm walking by the signpost, the last place I'm really looking is down here on this bottom edge. I might look, or I'm obviously going to look on the top and everywhere else, but I'm not likely to look down here. So you can also rearrange these signs. If you think it's coming up too high, you can pull it back down. But let's keep going and keep adding. Let's say I grab these, and I could go down to this one, or I can try and go up a little higher to here. If you make a mistake and you say, no, I don't want this one, or I don't want that one, you hold the Alt key and you click it again, it'll turn it off. So Alt will remove, and just regular clicking will add. So I'm going to keep clicking and clicking until I have more or less an entire square. So now I can decide, is this good enough? Do I want to make this a little wider on the bottom? But this should be good enough. You're basically trying to make sure no one sees these blue lines. Put them in places that no one's going to look at. I could probably pull this out a little further, but it might be seen. So we can see what this looks like for now. Alright, so since we're already on polygon mode, turn off Edit Seams, or else you're going to keep grabbing more scenes. And all I have to do is grab one polygon. I don't have to use Control and keep adding them. As long as I have at least one inside of this blue seam area, I can expand polygons to the seam edge. So that's the expand button right here. Expand face selection to seams. So once you create the seam as a closed seam, you just click one polygon using the polygon option and click to expand. So if I try that again, any one polygon, as long as it's within the blue area, expand, and it expands everything out. So it's a quicker way of doing one by one. So if I do a quick peel now, it'll peel this off, basically just like quick planer. Since it is more or less a plane, there's not much difference between the two. So let's move that over there for now. So I've set that aside, but I still have all of these. However, I'm going to get a lot of distortions with this if I try and peel it. So let's say I grab all of this, which is all the remainder, and you can see how there's a lot of distortions here. Let's try quick peel and see what happens. So I use quick peel, and it peels it off, and it looks pretty uniform on the top, but it still has a whole lot of distortions down here, where it's very large squares, and now they're getting really tiny squares. So you're really distorting it because it's not very uniform. I can try and go over here to the relax tool, click on this, hold it to get out the settings, and go to face and start relax, and see what happens now. So it looks like it's working. Let's say I press F4 to get rid of the lines. They're nice and square, so nice and even, but you can start to see here you're getting some non-square shapes. Here you're getting a lot of pointy shapes. They're very distorted. So we don't want distortions because that's going to mess up our textures. So we need to slice some more angles or pieces off. So that's not good enough, let's say. So we're going to put some more slices in here. Let's go with the seam editor, or just adding seams. If I scroll down to here, all we see right now is green. But at the very bottom, under display, you'll see map seams, which map seams means this green border. The map, which is this, that's what you're seeing. If I turn that off, you can see blue is still existing. It's just being covered up by the green at the moment. That's our peel seams. So what we made here, the seams under peel, it's displaying the peel seams. I can turn that off and it won't show it. I can turn map seams on. But as long as map seams are on, it'll cover up peel seams. So it's still peeled. The blue line is still there. I just don't see it at the moment. If I press F4 to put this back, I'm going to try and cut this a little more so it evenly distributes it. So let's say I grab this one and this one. And let's see if I can go any higher. Let's try this one. So it's going to peel up to here. Now I'm going to see a seam right here, but it should fix out the stretching. As long as you cut things more, the problem is it's too balloon shaped, and if you try and flatten it, you're going to get a lot of distortion around here. So if you slice it, it'll peel out easier. One will go out to the right, one will go out to the left. Let's see where else we can cut and not be noticed. We can probably put one here and here. Not that there's a lot of distortion down here, but it might help a little bit. Or I could try and put it over here. And so, as the artist, just try and figure out where you think will slice the easiest without people noticing your seams. That'll create less distortion. I don't really want to put anything on the front because that might be noticeable. Let's try and put one here and here and see what happens. So I'm slicing it up here, I'm slicing it up here, and I'm slicing it here. So I have a couple sections now. So now I turn the seam off. I'm still already on polygon mode. So if I click any one place and go to expand seams, it'll expand it all out. It's still looking at the blue seams even though we don't see them because it's just overriding with the green on it. So we can try this again. If I do quick peel, you can see it kind of pulls it all out. Another option is pelt. So let's Control Z. If I do pelt, it's going to peel it in a different way. So I start pelt and notice what happens over here. Let's slide this over. So it pulls everything from every corner. So every vertex on the border edge is being pulled outward, so it's evenly pulling everything. And then I can start relax and let it relax inwards. So now all the interior faces have evened out. So pelt just basically pulls, I guess like an animal skin, as you can see the shape. It's pulling all the edges out as far as they can go and then relaxing it inwards. So we'll commit to that shape, and as you can see now, the shape's looking a lot more cleaner. All of them are nice and clean. There's still a little distortion right here. We can keep playing with that to try and fix it, but otherwise it's looking pretty decent. So we might be okay with that. I could, if I wanted to, keep trying to adjust that. It's not super noticeably bad, but let's click off of there and just try and find that piece. So if I click here, the distortion is occurring right here. So you can see it's kind of bunching it up, whereas this larger piece is being squished in right here. So the idea of cutting the seam up to here was to fix that. but it might have been easier to slice it across here. So if you wanted to redo something, let's turn off our map seam so we can see the blue lines again. Go to seam and Alt, remove that, and just, if you use Control, just slice it right here. Just click the button. And so now that puts a cut mark there. Let's see what happens now. So we turn off seams, we'll grab any polygon, expand, and let's do pelt again, and it'll redo our orientation. So I click pelt, start pelt, and it pulls it again from every corner. Start relax, and then stop. Then press commit, and see what happens now. There's still a little bit of a distortion, but it should be a little easier to work with now. Probably a little bit less distortion, but again, we're going to have a slice mark right here on a rock, which could be noticeable if you're walking around, if you're looking down on the rock. But otherwise, it's kind of hard to fix that without too many distortions. I could slice another part up to here, and that might work better. So again, it's just a lot of playing around to try and minimize any of this distortion that we're looking at. So it all depends what we can get away with. I think I'll leave that. Instead of seeing one seam coming up here, I'll just leave the one right there and call it good enough for now. Alright, so we'll put that right there. And if I select both of these, and I'm already under the relax tool, if I start relax, it'll relax both of these to the same proportional shape. So everything should be the same size squares. So if I press F4, it turns off the lines, and you can see that more or less the same square shape up here is the same here and the same here, and they're all exactly the same, except for maybe some distortions there, and maybe they're getting smaller and bigger there. So that's why we're using the checker pattern, to look at how that works. Alright, so let's move these off to the side. I don't really want to put them on here because when we attach all of our objects, they're going to get combined. So that's good right there. Let's close that, and we finished one object. So that was pelting to pull it off in every direction. Planer would have worked fine, or peel. So let's click the unwrap to let go of that option. Now I can click this new stone object. Editable mesh is fine, and whether it's editable poly or not. Click on the unwrap button, and so now we have an unwrap on here. And again, we can't see what we're looking at, and it makes it hard to see the stretching and distortions without a checker pattern. So I'm going to drag the checkered onto here, and again you can see it's nice and clean, but very, very distorted, and we want it to be nice and clean, uniform overall. So again, it's running through the same pattern. So we have the unwrap. I'm going to pull up the Open UV Editor window. I can see that the reason it's looking nice and clean at the top is because it's looking from the top down, and that's why it's stretching all of these. So I'm going to run through with the seams again, and I'm going to turn on F4 so I can see the lines. And let's put the seams on the back side where we're not going to see them. There's actually an easier option. If I do point-to-point seams, instead of just clicking one at a time, I can say from one vertex to the other. So let's say I start right here. So I'm going to use the top vertex down to here, and then if I go all the way across to here to this vertex, it'll automatically draw the line for me across all of them. So that saves me a few clicks. Sometimes it might take the wrong direction. If I click this one, it looks like it went the way I wanted it to go anyway. Actually, let's say I don't want that. I can Control Z. Let's click this one right here. So it pulls it up at this angle. So let's right click there, and we need to go from here out to here, and then up to here. And so this might not make sense, but if you can visualize, we have one piece here, and here. So all of these are going to unroll like you're unrolling a piece of paper. They're all going to be one piece, but I need these not to be attached. So I'm going to slice these off, and these are going to pop out to the side. So let's try this again. One more, from here out to here, and then up to here, and right click to cancel. And so now I've sliced out this part. So if you can picture a box being put together, I'm going to see the seams on the edges, which can't really be helped. But when I unwrap it, or let's say peel it, so I turn that off, it looks like I'm not on the polygon mode, so click on polygon, grab any one piece, expand out your selection, and then we'll do, instead of like pelt, we'll just do quick peel this time. So we're going to peel it directly off. And if you do quick peel, you can see exactly what happened. It peeled everything off in kind of like a cross formation, whereas these lines right here, this section, became one of these sections on the side. So if I grab this and this, you can see that instead of all this being bunched together, because all of this would have been one big circular piece and have a lot of distortion, this popped out as one whole separate side. So there's no distortion now, but we might have a seam here. But if I turn off F4, we can see that the polygons are nice and clean and perfect, and there's no more distortion. So peel worked really, really well for this. And we've already peeled off one. And there's no lines, as few lines as possible. So on the bottom, we're going to see a lot of seam lines. But here, we don't see many lines. So we're going to try and hide those seams as well as possible. If you notice they're kind of at an angle, that's because they're corresponding to how this is looking. If I go to rotate, and I rotate this straight up and down, you can see how it's rotating on the screen. So the angle doesn't really matter, but that's just why it's moved. Might as well relax to see what happens. We'll do face angles, start relax, and there's not much change. Peel does a pretty good job. So let's go to move, and let's move this off to this side. And I'm going to try and leave the grid open in the center. Alright, next up, we'll turn off unwrap. Do the same exact thing, but let's try and go a little quicker this time. So let's put on an unwrap, press the U for the shortcut key, and it drops you down to there. And then open the UV editor. Let's move that away, drag on this, put this, back up here. And again, it's out of order, all very distorted. All we have to do is cut some seams into there. So we're going to grab this. So whereas the difference up here at quick planar, we grabbed one whole flat surface and did quick planar. But because this is multiple surfaces going around, we want to peel it off so it stays intact, so we don't have seams on every corner. We want to try and minimize the number of seams we're seeing. F4 will turn that back on. I'm going to do point to point, so it saves me some steps. I'm going to start, let's say up here. So I'm going to go from this corner down to this corner, back to this corner, and then straight across. I can't see too well, so I'm going to click halfway and rotate, and click up to there. That should work so far. We'll click it to here, and then up to there. And then right click to cancel. We'll start here to here. And so you can see all I'm doing is tracing all of the corners of this box. Alright, so right click to cancel again. And we have this whole side cut out. We have this whole side cut out. And then all the rest of the sides are completely still together, except for this one slice right here. So if you can repeat this pattern where it's just kind of cut out like this, and you can redo it multiple times to see how well it turns out. But we have this, we'll turn off seam. It looks like it's not on polygon mode, but you can press 3 and it'll jump to polygon mode for you. That's 3 on the keypad or the keyboard. Then expand to the full selection, which in this case is the entire object, because the seam, unlike this one where it divided it, this one doesn't divide anything, it just cuts it for you. And then again, quick peel. We'll peel it off nice and perfect. If you want to rotate it, you can. It's not that important. And then we'll just move it and move it up here to another quadrant. So we have the rock sitting here, one stone here, one stone up here. You don't have to move them around, but when we attach them all, you'll see that it combines all the pieces together. Alright, and so now we'll jump on to this, which we have to click the unwrap to deactivate this, and then we can click away. So I'm just going to drag this on here, and you can see nothing happens. And I can drag this on here, and nothing happens because there's no UVs on here. We have no unwrap, so it doesn't know where to put any textures whatsoever. It's as if textures don't exist. It can't texturize it like these. So let's go over to, let's do the post first. Alright, and again we're going to do another unwrap. So press U for the keyboard to drop it down here, and then you can click this. Open up the UV editor, and as soon as I put on that unwrap, you see it popped in with all the textures. So F4 on the keyboard, you can see it's nice and clean from the top down because it's looking top down, but all the sides, it's stretching all the way down, and it looks really, really bad, and your textures are not going to look like wood grain whatsoever. even though it is kind of grainy, I suppose, but it's not going to look right. So we need to stretch or unstretch all this and relax everything. And so we can do the same process we did with these, just seam all the top, seam the bottom, and put a seam down the side. Or there's one other option, in case you want to try something different. You go to polygon mode. Let's say we do F4 so we can see our lines again. We'll grab one using the control key to add more. If you don't use control, you're just going to grab one at a time. So hold control, you grab a couple more pieces, and that looks like it's the entire top surface. So that's good right there. So we have the top, and remember the quick planer button? It creates a plane. It throws it right in the center. So we have a plane. It just ripped off that whole top piece. I zoom down to the bottom and repeat again. 1, 2, 3. And try and find anything looks like it's connected to the bottom. Alright, so we have all that connected, and we'll do quick planer, and you can see it's still attached, but quick planer will rip it off, and now we have a whole separate piece. So quick planer and quick peel both have lightning bolts, but there's a difference between the two of these, so be careful which ones you're using. Now that we've done that, and we go down, if we turn off our map seams, you'll see that there's no blue lines because we never made an actual seam. It ripped it off and put it as a separate piece, but there's no seam. So let's turn map seams back on. This time we're going to use point to point and try and make a seam coming straight down. So I'm going to look at this in a direction that most people probably won't look at it as. Let's say right here. Oops. We'll start with this. And it's kind of on the front, but it's kind of going down the side, this least likely to be seen. And it's kind of going to go around that little part where the root or the branch stuck out. So I'm going to try and hide it there. So let's come down to, let's say, here. If we can find where the bark is, actually let's right click to cancel. And let's drag on a blank texture. So I'm going to grab this. Boom. And it doesn't exist. So let's turn off that so it doesn't show it. Nope, wrong one. Turn that one back on. Let's go to the blank one and turn the blank one off. There we go. So now we can kind of see just the gray silhouette without the lines. This might make it a little easier for us. So now we go back to point, and we're still on it. So I'm going to click this one. And what I'm going to do now is try and follow the bark line. So if I go down to here, so even though it's towards the front, if I follow the bark line, you can kind of see how it's bumped out right here. It's going to be a lot less noticeable what we're doing because the cut mark will have a difference between the wood grain, or the bare wood, and the bark, so it's going to be harder to see that rather than being sliced right through the middle of the same type of color. So let's bring that down to here. And let's go down to here. Let's say we go, let's follow around that a little bit, and then drop straight down. Boom. And right click to cancel. So it's kind of off to the back side. We might see a little bit on the front, but it's also between bark and wood grain, so that'll make it a little more hidden. And so it comes as well hidden down as it can. And it's going to go from this patch area, the green map line, all the way up to this one. So as long as it's seamed like that, let's turn off seam. Let's click any one of these polygons, and if I click expand, it's actually going to expand everything. And the reason is because there's no blue seams up here. So had we done the blue seams, it wouldn't have grabbed that, and we can do peel or planer on that and it'd be fine. But because we didn't make seams everywhere, it looks like it grabs everything, and it does. However, it does grab it, but it'll still work with the quick peel. So peel will peel this off, like it'll slice it and just relax it outwards. So let's click on quick peel, and it pulled it out, it unrolled it. Like you take a piece of paper and you unrolled it. Let's click on, oops, if you do element mode right here, it allows you to select everything at once. So element, turn that off, you're only going to grab one piece at a time, but if you grab this, it'll grab everything within the green border around here. And you can see it left those pieces alone. So even though they were selected, it left them alone when we did the peel because there already was a seam on there, or a map seam. So it wasn't a blue cut seam, but it was a seam, so it didn't include those. So now let's throw this back on here, and you can see it looks a lot better now. Let's use the F4 button to turn that off, and you can see it gets a little bigger here and really dense there. But let's see what we can do. Let's grab all three of these pieces and go to click and hold, pop this out. And let's switch out to face angles, start relax, and see what happens. Looks like it had a little distortion there, but it popped itself clean. And now if I click off it, you can see that all the checkers are the exact same size. There's little to almost no distortion everywhere. It's perfectly uniform all over the place. And so that pretty much finishes up this. The last one is the signpost. I'm going to grab this, close out that, and rotate this. Let's probably go straight and see what happens. And let's grab this and move this to here and here. Kind of keep them close and organized. And let's move all of those up there. Alright. You can also scale them down if you wanted to, but I'll leave them that size. So I'm kind of remembering where I left everything. And the last one is the signpost. So I got to click unwrap to turn that off, which will close all my windows. This one already dragged on the textures, so it's already there, but it needs the unwrap. So unwrap, boom. And again, it's very, very distorted because it doesn't really know how to organize this yet. So we'll open the Open UV editor. You can see it's very distorted. And this time, we're going to use a combination of quick planar and peel like we did with this one. And we're going to grab, let's say F4 to see our lines again. Instead of grabbing one by one to try and grab this, there's another option. Right here, you can select by planar angle. So if I click this option, right now it's 0 degrees, so it won't, actually, it works pretty well. It grabs everything within 0 degrees. But it missed these areas right here because it was more than a 0 degree curve. So if I Control Z, let's say I set this to, let's say, 10. If I grab this one, it should grab everything within a 10 degree angle. You can set this to 20 and see what happens. So 20 and boom, it grabs everything. So everything within 20 degree angle, it grabs. If I do anything more than that, let's say let go, let's say we do 100 degree. Or not 180, 100. Alright, so this is a 90 degree curve right here. So it won't go past 90, but we set it to 100. So now it'll grab past the 90 to 100, but it won't quite grab all the way around. So I don't want it to grab those edges, so I'm going to Control Z on that. So I'm going to set this back to, let's say, 20. Oops. 20. And now I grab this. It's a quick way of just basically grabbing. So if I use Control to add that, I now have all of the back selected, so I don't have to worry about trying to grab behind this column right here. So let's select it. I'm going to turn off that, so I don't need that anymore. And because that's grabbed, you can see it's really distorted back here. I'm going to do quick planar, and it rips that off. One piece by itself, put that down there. And now let's grab this last one. So everything left up here is basically what's here. So you can just double check. Everything's red around here. We've selected everything on here. And if I did quick planar, let's try that. Quick planar, boom. It takes a plane of the front. So that looks like it works, except that these edges are 1 pixel big. So you're going to get all that distortion. It's all stretching that checker mark. So it's nice and checker, but it's stretching. As soon as the black reaches the edge, it pulls it straight back because it's only 1 pixel big. So we need to cut those apart and relax them. So I'm going to go back to the seams again and try and cut these edges. So I put a seam right there. I'll put a seam right here. I'm going to cut these corners just like a box so the flaps open up. Put a seam right here. And since this is kind of like diagonal, it should be good enough right there. So I put 3 seams in there. Turn off seams, grab the polygon, expand out to there, and let's do quick peel. Boom. So now it peeled it back open. So it opened the notches between the corners, and if I go to click and hold, relax, start relaxing by face angles, it relaxes pretty well. And you can see that it left the notches, so there's no more distortions. It looks nice and clean and organized. F4 to turn off those lines. And you can see it's nice and squared. So everything is nice and squared. And I can leave this one in the center, I suppose. And let's just example. So if I didn't move it and this is sitting over here where the rock was, you'll see what happens when I do this later. So I close out all these things. So you can see that the checkers aren't the same size. That's really dense and that's not dense. We want them to all be proportional. And it doesn't matter which one you start off with. You can grab any piece that you want. Let's say this one or that one. I'll start with the post, let's say. And we'll put an edit poly on there. So edit poly. And put it on F4 so we can see our lines. So now we have this right here. And we'll go to attach. So without using any of the selection tools, we just go attach. And I want to attach the sign. So now the sign is part of this. We'll attach the rock, the stone, and the stone. So all of these are one object. So now turn off attach. So don't drag across and do attach. Just click attach and do one by one by one, and then turn off attach. So everything's attached. So if I just click one piece, it grabs everything at once. So now when we get to the game engine, we'll drop one whole post in at the same time instead of all piece by piece. So we have all of this worked out. Now if I put a new unwrap, don't go underneath of it. It's going to say it's going to have problems, so don't do that. Just put a new unwrap on top. So I have an unwrap that we did originally in the post, an edit poly that attached everything, and a new unwrap. And what happens now, because we attached everything, all of the UVs have attached with it, which is why I left them in different quadrants. This one I left here knowing that the rock was here, and it overlaps them. So it's easier in terms of separation if you move them around first. So if you click on element mode, it makes this a lot easier. You click just the one. I'm going to use polygons also. So click this, move this over here. So now they're all separate. And click this, move it over here. So every piece has been, I can selectively grab each piece and they're all on the same grid, but they all have to fit here. But again, they're all different sizes. So if you see here, it's a lot larger and a lot smaller. And it's all corresponding to the size of how big your object is. The smaller it gets, and the bigger it gets, you're going to get different densities of pixels or checkers. Now if you grab everything and go to the relax, click and hold, this will automatically fix everything for you. So go to face angles and start relax, and you can see that everything is resizing to be proportional to everything else. So if I leave the mouse here and don't move it off the button, it'll keep going and going and going until it fixes everything and puts everything in alignment. So you can see it's still moving and tweaking and trying to readjust and calibrate. So we'll call that good enough and see what happens. Alright, let's zoom in. And it looks like the sign turned out really bad, but the rest of the pieces look pretty decent. So let's click on the sign and let's go to move this over here. We'll move this over here and this over here. They all got the same shape, but this got really distorted. Let's try this by itself. Start relax, and it's really not working. It's really distorted. So let's try and switch this one to edge angles and start relax. This one, for whatever reason, likes edge angles better. The other ones like face angles. So it doesn't matter which one you use as long as it works. And it looks like it already matched all the sizes. So everything is now proportionally sized in relation to anything else. So don't go through and size it later, because you're going to readjust things. Once you've relaxed everything to the same size, keep everything the same size. So let's grab everything at once and scale everything down. And zoom in. And let's move this over to here. We'll try and fit the biggest piece in first. Now the fun part of playing Tetris. So this goes right here, and it looks like I'm still not going to be able to fit everything else in there, so let's go and scale it a little smaller. And then move it over here. Alright, now let's see what I can fit. I can turn off checkers here, just so it makes it a little easier to see what I'm looking at. Let's see, let's grab this and let's rotate this a little more just so I can fit it closer to the edge. Let's grab this rock and put it up here. Let's grab this one and put it right here. The sign, let's rotate this. Is the town, it looks like it's right side up, I guess. So we'll move this over here. Let's try and keep it near the other sign so when I'm coloring I know which objects are near each other. So I'll put this somewhere on there. Maybe I can move both of these up to here. Now let's put the rock over here and the other patch of the rock here. And I still have a lot of extra space that I'm wasting. So I'm going to try and make this and fill this a little tighter. So let's take everything and scale it a little bigger. And let's rearrange it again. Fit the biggest piece in there first, and then try and fit the remainders in there. So this is probably pretty big too. So I'll put this in the corner. Let's rotate it and move it. Alright, and I could just click this one, which is probably easier. You get both options at the same time. So let's move this over here. Nah, I don't think this is going to work too well. Yeah, now it's too big. So we're going to grab everything, go back to scale, regular scale, scale it down a little more, move it over here, and let's see if we can fit this any better. So let's put this here, this here. Let's try and get these out there. We'll fill those in later as they're smaller. Put this here, and they're still overlapping a little bit. Unless we rotate these. Let's try rotating this direction and move it to fit. Let's try rotating this one and move it to fit. Alright, and take this one. Let's see if we can rotate this anymore. And then move that. So all you have to do is make sure it fits inside of this square. And it looks like the pieces so far are fitting pretty well. They're really close. If they're overlapping, they're going to start covering up each other's textures and getting duplicates in places. But that looks like it'll fit. We'll put this up here. This probably won't fit there, so I'm just going to rotate this around. Move it up there. Looks like it'll fit there. Slide this over there. And now the smallest pieces should be able to fit in here somewhere. Let's rotate this. Looks like that'll fit. And this can get moved over here. And this can get moved over here. Alright, so everything now fits as maximized as it can. Try and move that up some, see what happens. Try and get away from there. It looks like everything's clear. Nothing green is bumping the edges. And move that up some. Probably move that over some. So everything is as clear away as we can get it. Alright, and that finishes the unwrapping part. So we've taken this one object, we've unwrapped each piece individually, and then attached them all. You could attach them and then unwrap them, but it's going to mix all the pieces together. So it's usually easier to unwrap it first and then attach all the pieces. And so that creates our final unwrapping. So we can close this out now. And we'll leave all that there. We don't need any of this anymore. So turn off that. And we've unwrapped our textures. So we have here the checkered. We could put the default gray back on there and we can take a look at it, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to leave the checkered on there just so I can make sure that the textures are looking pretty organized. And the last thing to do, let's switch over to our layers and let's turn off the low res, or hide the low res, and turn on high res. Actually, let's switch back out to here and let's press save first because I haven't saved this for a while. We'll do save as, tutorial demo, UVs, and press save. Alright, so we have the UVs done, and let's switch back on to the high res. If you notice here on the high res, it looks really smooth. It had more detail in ZBrush, and the reason is 3ds Max is using normal mapping to smooth everything and curve everything. And the game engine does that also, but ZBrush leaves it very sharp and angular. So we want to switch that back to the angular version so we can see all the pieces again, all the cuts in there. And again, even like here, we're losing a lot of that wood grain detail we carved in there because it's smoothing it out for us, which is a good thing, but in this case we don't want that. So if you click on the object, editable mesh is fine. You can always right click and convert it to other things like editable poly, which we're used to, but editable mesh is fine. If you scroll down here, you're not going to see what we're looking for until you put it in either element or polygon mode. Put it in element mode and then click on your object so it selects all of it at once. Polygon mode will only select parts of it, but element mode will select all of it. So I'm going to leave it in element mode, and if I slide down here, a new option pops out called smoothing groups. Inside of smoothing groups, It's basically smoothing out your object. If you clear all the smoothing groups, nothing will smooth anymore. So if I click off this now, you can see that, whoops, it has a lot of the detail now. All that ZBrush work that we put in here has been restored back there. So before it looked like this, but if I clear the smoothing groups, now it looks nice and detailed again like bark. So that's what happened there. And the same thing for this one. If we click off the editable mesh and grab this one, again, 5 in this case with the shortcut button to grab and select element mode, then you grab the sign and clear all, and all that wood grain comes back. So you press Control Z and you can see that it's very smooth. But if you redo it, it really adds all the wood grain back in there for you, and that's what we want. You can see it also adds all those polygon facets in there, and we don't really want that, but that works. Alright, so now when we look at it, you can see a lot of higher resolution detail to it. We can do that also for the rocks if they were exported high enough. So let's try this one. Oops, turn that off. Grab this one. Go to element mode, click this object, clear all, and again it adds a little more detail to it instead of being so smooth like this. So let's turn that off, grab this one, put this in element mode, grab the object and clear it, and unselect it. You can see with this one, we didn't go high enough on the polygon count, and it looks a little polygon, or too many polygons. So when we decimated it, we should have left it with a little more polygons like this one had. It looks a little too rough, but it should be okay. Rocks are usually rough. And then the last one, we'll click that off, click on this one, slide down here, oops, put it in element mode with the 5 button, select our object, and clear all. And again, this was really polygonized, polygonalized, I guess, however you pronounce that. There's too many, like here you can see it's really nice and refined, very small polygons, but here the polygons were too big. So we should have decimated this a little bit less so it doesn't create too many jagged points. But again, before and after it was really smooth when it first imported into Max. So you can see here it's really smooth. If this is the desired result, then that's great. But if you wanted to get a little more texture to it, you clear those and get a little more sharper of a rock. So I'll leave it like this and see what happens. So now we've restored the high resolution that came out of ZBrush, whereas Max tries to smooth it out. So that looks good like this. If you also notice, the signpost now has those wood grain carvings back in there, whereas they disappeared for a little bit when Max smoothed it out for us. So that's set. We now have the high res imported. If I do F4 to put the lines back on, you can see it's really dense. To actually get a polygon count, so let's say we pull up the hammer. I've already added this in here. If it's not already here, you just pick out the more and then pick it out of the list, but I've already attached it to my toolbar. So polygon counter, the rock is 31,000 and it's not quite enough polygons. This was 39,000, it's still a little too many, not too rough. This one was 159,000, which is why it's a lot cleaner. So again, the difference is the more polygons we've imported, the less we get of the roughness and the more clean we get. This one was 132,000, so you get nice and clean detail versus 30,000. And this one is 110,000. So again, the more polygons, the better the resolution for your high res, which is what we want. But altogether, that's almost 500,000 right here. So we have already a lot of polygons in the program. Importing more, maybe we could have done 60,000 and been okay with this, maybe 100. But there is a point to how many polygons you start importing that it starts slowing down your program. But this should work. Let's close out. I'll leave that open. Let's turn off the high res. We don't need that. Turn on the low res. If I select all of this, you can see this whole object combined is only 974 polygons. So the objective for this project is to keep it under 1,000, which is what we were counting in Max when we decimated this, to keep this around, this might have been 200, 150, 150, which was 500 total, and then 250, 250. So we kept it under 1,000, so looked at it was 974 when I finished calculations. So that's our objective. 1,000 polygons into the game engine should be perfectly fine. So we'll close that. and we don't need the layers anymore. And that's pretty much it. We've got the unwrapping done. If we turn on the high res, we can see the high res is overlapping. Turn off F4. If the high res is sitting here on top of the low res, which is unwrapped, you do not want to unwrap the high res. That is just a no-no. The high res has, as you can see, an enormous amount of polygons. You don't want to try and unwrap that. It's completely not necessary. All we're going to do is unwrap the low res because this is what's going into the game. If you're not putting it into the game, there's no need to unwrap it. So we're going to turn both these on so they're both existing on top of each other. Don't make them separated. They should be perfectly left on top of each other, centered. And then we're pretty much done. On to the next part, which is projection mapping, which should be the next part of this tutorial. So we'll close out the layers. We can close out material editor because they're applied to that. And that should be this.